Hello, and good day to you all. Please don't be intimidated by the length of this video. It is almost an hour long, but it's loaded with interesting, professionally created videos about technologies to fight climate change, and very little of me, thankfully. So if you care about the fight against climate change, stay with this video. The following videos are a survey of technologies that will probably play a role in our economy in the renewable energy era. I don't mention solar panels or wind turbines because they have already been introduced to great effect. What has been included are new uses of solar technology. The focus is on newer applications of technologies we already have and therefore have the most realistic chance of making a near-term impact in the fight against climate change.
Arming. Okay, coming up.
Today is a really big day for electric flight. Vertical takeoff and landing, it all happened here.
Just incredibly proud to be a part of this team that's put this together. Both on the flight test side, we have an amazing flight test team, but also just the incredible engineering talent we have. When you've got exceptional people like we have at Joby, then you do exceptional things. We've redefined possible here at Joby. We've shown that with the right people and the right team and the right technology, we can do what everyone else thinks is impossible.
Now, a new transportation reality may be knocking on the door.
We're just at the dawning moments of a transportation revolution, which is going to take us into the skies for our daily mobility.
This is the electric air taxi from Joby, designed with commuting in mind. The plan is for customers to be able to book one the same way you'd book an Uber, skip the traffic, and fly. What would be a 49-minute taxi ride from Manhattan to JFK Airport, instead just 7 minutes. These are built for up to 4 passengers with a range of 100 miles going 200 miles per hour. And the way they're manufactured, they're actually 100 times quieter than a helicopter. What's the difference between this and a helicopter?
It's dramatically safer. Because it has 6 propellers, and each propeller is driven by a separate motor, by a separate inverter, by a separate battery pack, each layer on layer of redundancy.
The air taxis will be manned by commercial pilots. And with a vertical takeoff, they could land on rooftops or parking garages. And the electric batteries take just 30 minutes for a full charge, hopefully allowing for cheaper flight costs.
We set out when we founded the company to build an aircraft that could provide air taxi service that was comparable in price to ground-based taxis. So planning to launch it at the price of an Uber Black and drive that down to the cost of an Uber X over time.
And there is some competition in the field. Other companies like Archer Aviation are also racing into the air taxi space.
I think everybody has seen the rich and famous use helicopters. And the reason they do that is because it's convenient. This is the first time we're able to offer a product that's very safe, that is extremely convenient, but also can be affordable to the average person.
These aircraft do still require extensive safety testing before the federal government signs off on commercial flights. But the FAA administrator says that's already well underway, and certification is likely coming faster than we think.
There's still some testing that has to be done, but you could see these as soon as next year.
And Diane, several major airlines have already partnered with air taxi companies. They want to use this tech to shuttle people to and from the airport. United Airlines has already purchased $1 billion worth of air taxis. And maybe the most stunning thing that we heard is from the FAA administrator, not a company spokesperson, who compared this tech to the automobile and the cell phone, and that they think this tech could soon be everywhere.
Air taxis have a gee whiz futuristic quality, but the real message is new innovations can create jobs, new opportunities, new career paths, and whole new industries. When air taxis begin operations in 2025, that will be a major publicity boost to the realization that a move towards full electrification is a great idea.
Electric cars are increasingly staking a claim in the market, growing from just 4% of global car sales in 2020 to 14% in 2022. And with that popularity comes much needed charging infrastructure. A lack of charging infrastructure and range anxiety are among the top reasons US consumers aren't buying EVs.
We have definitely seen charging infrastructure affecting adoption, both in terms of the availability, accessibility, and the cost.
Biden's infrastructure bill allocated $7.5 billion to build out America's EV charging network, but a lot of those chargers are expected to be level 2, which only gives out about 25 miles of range in an hour. But there is another charging solution that doesn't require stopping at a station at all.
A road that could change the way we drive. It's powering and charging this electric bus on the go, wirelessly.
A process where roads are connected to the grid, allowing EVs to wirelessly receive a charge while driving over electricity transmitters. Sweden, which has become a world leader in the realm of electrified roads, already having taken part in 4 pilots, has plans to construct the world's first permanent electrified road. And the first electric road in the US is expected to be tested in Detroit, Michigan within a year.
The inductive charging project is looking at a system and implementation for electrification in vehicles on our infrastructure. So how can we take and look at different capabilities of charging infrastructure, whether it's plug-in charging or inductive charging, such as this project, and create a cohesive environment for people.
CNBC explores how electrified roads work and whether they'll become a widely adopted charging solution for EVs. Electrified roads work a lot like the wireless charging that's in most smartphones. With a transmitter coil in a phone and a wireless charger, a magnetic field is created in between, allowing the phone to receive between 10 and 15 watts of energy without any physical connection. Now multiply that amount of power by about 3,000, bury the coils under about 4 inches of pavement, add a wireless receiver to an EV, and you have a working dynamic electrified road. EVs don't currently have receivers allowing a wireless charge, but it's relatively cheap and easy to add, and manufacturers could start to integrate this technology in the future.
This approach is really a approach that can charge vehicles in any type of shape, meaning vehicles that are buses or vans or passenger cars or trucks, but it can also charge a vehicle while either driving or while standing still.
For a phone to charge wirelessly, the coils have to be almost perfectly aligned for it to work. But with an electrified road, the technology allows for more leniency, so precise alignment of the coils isn't necessary.
So you have a higher tolerance of moving on the road, on having an air gap that's tolerable, that makes it practical for using in everyday operations for cars. So it is much more of an efficient system, I would say, an optimal system compared to the phone charger, which is more simplistic.
These systems typically connect to the electrical grid. However, electrified roads can also be hooked up to battery hubs, connected to solar panels, or other sources of clean energy, which would make the process greener and allow for electric roads in disconnected areas, like on an interstate highway.
And that's where we see a lot of the benefits as well, both in terms of the environment, but also in terms of economic development. And that would definitely also release some of the pressure on the grid.
Right now, an estimated 43% of American roads are in mediocre or poor condition, and one report showed there's over $750 billion worth of backlogged road and bridge repairs. Some view this as the perfect chance to innovate.
as we rehabilitate a lot of the infrastructure. We know the conditions of our assets here in the US. It's an opportunity to really think about this technology, and it will be much more cost effective to be able to install and implement this as we, as I said, do more major rehabilitation of interstate highways, tollways, and so forth.
Electrifying roads would only add to the hefty price of road repair and maintenance. Electrion, one company leading the charge on electrified road technology, estimated that at a high production volume, the cost to electrify a mile of road would be about $1.2 million. While reconstruction costs per mile of a road can already cost anywhere between $1.5 to $11 million depending on condition and population density. Sweden is one of the pioneers implementing this technology in an attempt to reduce the nation's impact on the environment. It has already piloted 4 unique electrified road projects, testing out different electricity conduction techniques.
We have kind of tough climate goals in Sweden. That is, we have to reduce our carbon footprint 70%. If you look at how it looked at 2015-14 there, the battery capacity wasn't like it is now. So for the heavy transport, we have to look into other solutions. And that was why we were into e-roads.
And now the EU will require all new cars in member states to be electric starting in 2035, adding pressure to improve EV infrastructure. Electron has several pilot programs in operation, including projects in Israel, Norway, and Italy, among others. One project in Sweden, which connects the airport to the town of Visby, cost about $10.5 million and was almost entirely financed by the Swedish Transport Administration. It also has some commercial programs in the works, like its bus project running in Berlin, Germany. Once all stages of the project are complete, it will have 2 static charging stations and 1 kilometer of dynamic charging, which adds an estimated 2 to 4 kilometers of range to the battery. Electrion is also working with the state of Michigan to pilot a dynamic electrified road in Detroit within the next year, which would be the first in the US. The project costs about $6 million, with the Michigan DOT spending about $1.9 million and Electrion covering the rest.
The first location is in the city of Detroit on 14th Street. We have 2 static charging pads that will be installed in that area. So that's an area where the shuttle can pull up on, last mile delivery, trucks can pull up there while they're making their delivery, they can be getting a charge. And then we have about a quarter of a mile on 14th Street that will be installed in the pavement that will be for in-motion charging. And then in 2024, we'll be installing on Michigan Avenue as part of a road reconstruct project of about 3/4 of a mile.
As part of this pilot program, they're studying how this technology could later be implemented in Michigan at a larger scale.
We really are looking hard within this pilot project to look at the different use cases that are out there. There's use cases for freight, transit, but then also passenger vehicles.
But even if the pilot proves successful, it could still be some time before you start to see electrified roads used more widely in the US.
Ramping it up is a little more difficult with inductive charging because of the infrastructure impacts. So it does go under the pavement surface. So we have to look at the use cases, right, that we've identified. We're not going to go, redo every road in the state of Michigan, to put this charging in, but looking at a sustainable plan forward of how that implementation would be in those key areas where our citizens in Michigan would get the benefit.
A typical city bus in the US gets only 3.4 miles per gallon with a fuel tank that holds about 125 gallons of gasoline. That means a diesel bus can go over 400 miles without needing a refill. And an electric bus's range can sometimes max out at 150 miles, not to mention the hours it'll need to recharge. Many of these fleet vehicles are essentially driving without stopping, meaning batteries will be drained fast.
Operating repetitively for long hours, needing huge batteries, a lot of tons of batteries, like maybe 8 tons more, and that costs a lot of money, and it's heavy for the roads.
In addition to dynamic charging, companies like Electrion are also creating static chargers, a technology it's thinking could be perfect for buses. As it halts at each stop, even if it's just for 30 seconds, it could harness enough electricity to keep going throughout the day.
And it's pretty fantastic because that bus doesn't need to go now suddenly in charge overnight at the depot. So you can, extend the operations of the bus. You can limit the load at the depot when all the buses need to charge.
One of Electron's case studies in Israel is a bus line that includes 700 meters of electrified roads and a static charger at the bus terminal. While the EV market is growing at rapid rates, charging infrastructure is inherently needed to support that growth. There were about 87,000 electric vehicle charging ports in the US in 2019. Now there's over 160,000 nationwide, nearly doubling in just 3 years. But studies show the US needs 8 times more charging stations by 2030 to handle the coming wave of EVs. But right now, the vast majority of working electrified road projects are temporary, either case studies or pilots.
The important thing is that the technology is here. It's there for commercial use and deployment. And so we're working with the right entity to first do these pilots where you get all the ecosystem together, from the vehicles, from the road construction, from the public authorities, and getting the permits and all these things and the use cases. And so once we put that in together, then you now enable a platform to grow in the state, in the city, in the country.
It would also be extremely costly to electrify every road, so while it likely won't be a regular road replacement, it could fit well in certain target areas like exit ramps, intersections, and high-traffic streets.
We don't view 100% of roads being electrified, but we definitely see this technology being viable, both financially and also essential in rural areas where we might not have a lot of charging stations, or we have what we call charging deserts.
I expect that we'll have focus on certain regions where this is widely adopted in a city for commercial fleets. And I think in 10 years, I foresee a scenario where we also have intercity roads between regions that have electric corridors.
We're gonna rock down to Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it higher.
The major takeaway from the electric charging road video is that an innovation in one part of our economy leads to other benefits. Imagine that we have rolled out electric charging roads extensively, then the idea of reducing the size of the battery and its range would be very practical. Smaller batteries would make a significant reduction in manufacturing costs for EVs possible. That should improve sales. This is just the beginning. A fleet of city buses or delivery vans would never have to stop for recharges. Which brings us to the biggest takeaway. There is a huge benefit to generating electricity as close to the point of use as possible.
The 1950s was a decade of breakthroughs for America. The first computer modem, the first transistor radio, and most of the transmission towers we rely on today for electric power were built in the 1950s. The life expectancy for this national network of towers was approximately 50 years. Our grandparents' grid system is way past its prime. It's unreliable, dirty, and expensive, and it can't handle the demands of the 21st century. It can't handle threats of cyber warfare. It can't handle extreme weather events. It can't ensure that critical facilities like hospitals stay functioning when the lights go out. One transmission failure can ripple through many communities. Our traditional grid system also fails to handle the increasing demand from new technology. Now is the time to reimagine our electric systems. One way to power into the future is with microgrids. Across the U.S., small-scale power networks called microgrids are emerging as the smart solution to our failing national grid system. By integrating multiple renewable power sources like solar, wind, and battery storage, microgrids can maximize efficiency and ensure uninterrupted power. What's more, these revolutionary systems can address climate change and help us transition from fossil fuels to clean energy without being disruptive.
We need microgrids today because our grid is brittle and it needs to be brought into the 21st century where we're facing real climate risks, real disruptions. We have a pathway to clean energy and to distributed energy that microgrids enable.
How does a microgrid differ from the central grid? Our current central electric grid is the interconnected wires and poles and power plants that deliver electricity to homes and businesses across the country. It is completely interdependent. If a transmission line in one community fails, other communities can suffer. A microgrid, using locally sourced renewable energy, serves a small geographic area, like a campus or a neighborhood or a city. It can be either completely independent or work in sync with the current central electric grid. Eventually, a statewide and nationwide series of microgrids can replace our central, unreliable, and inefficient grid system. Because they rely on locally produced renewable energy, microgrids can run independently, sometimes called islanding, in the event of wildfires, floods, or hurricanes, or any other major disruption.
A microgrid is basically a mini version of the larger grid, except that it's smarter, it's cleaner, it's more efficient, and it's tailored to meet the local community's needs using their local resources.
The thing about microgrids is that because they're deployed at the local level, they also provide high-paying, good quality jobs in the communities that need them.
According to a 2021 Economic Impact Report by Guidehouse, microgrids powered by renewable energy will generate nearly 500,000 new jobs, 72 billion in GDP growth, and 146 billion in business sales by 2030.
Microgrids also address one of the biggest inefficiencies of the centralized system, which is moving power from one place to another.
With the central electric grid, significant power is lost when it has to travel miles and miles across transmission lines. Microgrids are more efficient because energy is created very close to where it is used, which, in addition to efficiency, also means savings to consumers. By some estimates, as much as 15% of the power generated by power plants is lost by the time that it reaches the consumer. Society pays the price for that in the form of higher energy costs and environmental harm.
Microgrid technology will enable decentralizing the electric grid, which will have security benefits. Also, communities will feel the economic benefits of electrification.
Hello and welcome to Just Have a Think. Our global agricultural systems account for more than a third of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. They also use a huge amount of water. According to the World Bank, agriculture consumes about 70% of all freshwater withdrawals and an even higher share of what's known as consumptive water use as a result of evapotranspiration of crops. Rapid changes in the global climate mean that if we carry on with our current agricultural methods, there's no way there'll be enough water even to grow the current level of food production, let alone what we'll need by 2050. Right now, that system is struggling to feed more than 7.8 billion people. In 30 years' time, that number will be more like 9.8 billion. And as more and more of those people are lifted out of poverty and begin to adopt a heavier, more varied diet, food production will somehow need to double over the next 3 decades at a time when the rapidly increasing impacts of climate change are making current farming practices look less and less sustainable as every year goes by. Access to food will need to be drastically improved so that some of the gross inequities in the world are addressed, and food waste will need to be dramatically reduced too. Right now, we throw away more than 30% of everything we produce. If nothing changes at all, then we will quite likely be looking at food shortages, water scarcity, regional conflicts and economic destabilisation. So all sorts of agricultural systems are now being developed and promoted all over the world to try and make the whole thing more sustainable. And one of the ideas gaining a lot of interest right now is to combine food production with energy production in a concept known as agrophotovoltaics or agrivoltaics, or just APV for short. There's a strong clue in the name, of course, and sure enough, in very basic terms, it means putting solar panels in a field where crops are also grown. So how does it work in practice, and what do we gain from doing it? Well, it turns out there's a limit to how much sun any individual plant can actually use. It's something known as the light saturation point. Any extra light received beyond that point makes no difference at all to the plant's photosynthesis. All it does is make the plant sweat, which makes it more thirsty. So by strategically placing solar panels directly above a crop growing area, it's theoretically possible to precisely regulate how much sunlight reaches each plant, so that they've got the optimum level for maximum growth with minimum water loss. All the excess sunlight that would otherwise be wasted on the plants would then be captured on the upper side of the solar panels to generate energy. And if the panels are raised up high enough above the ground, then livestock, farm workers, and even agricultural machinery can all operate very happily in the cool shade beneath the canopy. And it's not a one-way street either. It's a mutually beneficial, symbiotic relationship. As the plants grow beneath the panels, they help to keep the panels cool. Ironically, solar panels don't actually like getting hot. It reduces their operating efficiency. So anything that can draw heat off them will help to make the panels more productive. According to a study by Oregon State University, panels positioned correctly above plants can produce as much as 10% more electricity. And that electrical energy can be used to run the farm with electric tractors and equipment, and to power precision agricultural technology that helps further reduce water usage. All of that obviously reduces the running costs for the farm, and any surplus energy can be stored in battery banks or sent to the grid for consumer use. So you're effectively using the sunlight twice, to grow cash crops and to generate a second income stream from the solar power generation. Farmers all over the world are finding it increasingly difficult to make ends meet without huge government subsidies. In the USA, that struggle is starting to nudge towards something more like an existential crisis, as trade wars, commodity prices and climate change all combine into a perfect storm of economic disaster. Between 2011 and 2018, more than 100,000 farms were shut down across America. So the ability to use the land more profitably while still providing crops for the nation is a potential lifeline that could keep many farmers from going bankrupt. And the OSU study also calculated that converting just 1% of American farmland to agrivoltaics could meet the entire US national renewable energy target, not to mention saving a significant amount of water and creating sustainable long-term food production systems. But it's not just happening in America. APV technology is being quite enthusiastically embraced all over the world. Japan implemented 654 projects between 2013 and 2018, with a peak generating capacity of about 150 megawatts. South Korea currently have about 2 megawatts worth, and of course the mighty China, who, as we've learnt on so many occasions on this channel, never ever do anything on a small scale, installed an estimated 4 gigawatts of agricultural PV capacity just in the 3 years between 2015 and 2018. Over here in Europe, according to this report by Agora Energy Vendor and the British think tank Ember, 2020 marked the first time that the EU generated more power from renewable sources than from fossil fuels. Renewable energies made up 38% of the European energy mix in 2020, compared with 37% from oil, gas and coal. So the potential for agrivoltaics here is huge. France is already getting involved, led by the winemaking industry. Sun Agri, a subsidiary of French solar developer Sun-R, has installed a viticulture agrivoltaic system in the wine growing area of Piolon in Hérault in southeastern France as part of a programme to test how agrivoltaics perform in specific crop cultures. The project is running in partnership with the local Chamber of Agriculture as part of a programme supported by the French Environment and Energy Management Agency. In a recent interview with PV magazine, a Sun Agri spokesperson said vines are among the crops most affected by the effects of climate change, so it's essential that they be at the heart of our experiments. 1,000 square metres of vines in the test area were planted with the black Grenache red wine grape. 600 square metres were covered by a system of 280 panels with a generation capacity of 84 kilowatts. The panels were mounted 4.2 metres, or about 14 feet, above ground, and are remotely controlled by an artificial intelligence algorithm that SunAgri have been developing for more than a decade. The algorithm determines the ideal tilt of the panels based on available sunshine, the water requirements of viticulture, the growth model of the crop, as well as soil quality and weather conditions. And in the event of extreme climatic hazards like drought, heat wave, hail, frost or heavy rain, the system positions the panels to protect the crops. Water demand was reduced by as much as 34% in the PV sheltered vines, thanks to that reduction in evapotranspiration that we looked at earlier. There are some challenges that could stand in the way of widespread use of agrivoltaics though, as this recent research paper by the German Fraunhofer Institute points out, not least of which is the higher initial capital costs compared to conventional ground-mounted PV installations. Those costs are mainly due to the much taller support systems used for the modules, as well as the need for site-specific system design. But the report also found that compared to other renewable energy sources today, APV overall looks quite competitive. The industry comparison standard known as levelized cost of electricity, or LCOE, comes out at 7 to 12 euro cents per kilowatt hour for agrivoltaics. That is higher than the ground-mounted systems, but it's already comparable with small rooftop PV systems. And as a bit of a bonus, freestanding APV installations also provide a valuable habitat for other plants and wildlife. With careful management, the extra protection from excess harmful sunlight improves the health of the soil and increases the level of nutrients, creating important ecosystems for plants and insects, which in turn increases the availability of food for field animals as well as birds and bats. Agrivoltaic technology itself is improving all the time. Panels can now be made translucent to allow finer control of the amount and specific wavelengths of light that are either absorbed by the panel or allowed through to reach the crops. And there are even completely mobile PV systems like this one from US company Tracker Sled, providing plug-and-play style modularity and mobility regardless of what type of terrain or topography it's deployed on. Despite the fact that the basic principles of APV have been known for about 4 decades now, the industry is still young and it's only recently started to evolve. Research is ongoing to find the best ways to adapt the system for producing as many types of fruit and vegetables as possible, and clearly more work needs to be done to ensure it's economically viable on a global scale. But agrivoltaics do look very promising, and the technology could play a major role in diffusing the current conflict between agricultural landowners and solar developers, especially in higher populated countries where space is at a premium.
With extreme weather as a more common effect of climate change, we obviously need to pay attention to our food supply.
Panels are now everywhere, over rooftop, on the water, or even in the space. But can you imagine that solar panels are now operating on roads, literally? 2 groundbreaking PV bike path initiatives are now operational in the Netherlands. Initiated in 2018 by Rijkswaterstaat, the Dutch water management agency, these innovative solar bike paths are the result of collaboration between French company Cola and Dutch construction contractor BAM Royal Group. The first path is located in North Brabant, and the second is in North Holland, each covering an impressive 1,000 square meters. Equipped with PV module technology boasting 21% efficiency per square meter, these solar cells are not only cutting edge but also environmentally friendly. What makes these paths unique is the meticulous design that ensures the solar cells are safeguarded by a resin multilayer. This not only protects the cells from wear and tear but also adds a layer of durability to the infrastructure. Moreover, the electrical architecture is carefully planned to minimize wiring, showcasing a commitment to both efficiency and aesthetics. The paths are expected to generate an impressive 160 MWh of renewable energy, contributing to a more sustainable future. These initiatives are part of Rijkswaterstaat's 2018 project, aligned with the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and the Environment. Now let's talk about the bigger picture of solar roads in the Netherlands. Solar roads aren't a new concept in the Netherlands. In 2016, a solar panel-equipped bike path near Amsterdam paved the way, followed by another in Utrecht in 2020. However, the practicality and economic viability of solar roads have been subjects of debate. To further explore solar power production on road infrastructure, the Dutch government is working on a plan involving solar installations along highways and noise barriers. This comes as a response to the challenges posed by the scarcity of land for large-scale PV plants. Researchers and private companies are also exploring alternative surfaces for solar projects, including dikes, rooftops, and onshore and offshore water areas. This comprehensive approach showcases the commitment of the Netherlands to finding innovative solutions for sustainable energy production. So, are there other benefits? A recent study indicates a 10% increase in cyclist satisfaction due to the shaded and well-lit paths. Additionally, the excess energy generated is being redirected to power nearby streetlights, further optimizing energy usage in the community. While the benefits are clear, let's address some expected drawbacks. The initial installation costs were high, but the long-term benefits in energy production and community satisfaction are beginning to outweigh these upfront expenses. Moreover, concerns were raised about maintenance costs. However, ongoing technological advancements are reducing the need for frequent maintenance, making these solar paths more economically viable over time. Another challenge is the seasonal variation in sunlight. To address this, researchers can explore energy storage solutions such as advanced batteries to ensure a consistent and reliable power supply, even during cloudy days. In general, the Netherlands' solar bike paths are proving to be a successful venture, offering not just green energy but also improved infrastructure for cyclists. As technology evolves, the drawbacks are being addressed, making solar roads an increasingly practical and sustainable solution.
This video shows us technology that will allow us to generate electricity closer to where it will be used. Sidewalks and driveways are other potential applications.
This is the typical demand for electricity on a spring day in California. It starts growing around 6 a.m., then rises again around 6 p.m. Now, this line shows when wind power feeds the California power grid. Wind is variable, but often picks up at night. Solar panels, on the other hand, kick into gear around 7 a.m., generate a lot of electricity until the sun sets around 7 p.m. On most days, neither comes close to meeting the peak demands of the day. So, the power company relies on fossil fuels, like natural gas, to make up for the gap, which widens significantly when people use electricity the most. Since the power company can't store the solar and wind energy, it has to use fossil fuels at these times, which can be stored in barrels and tanks.
It's kind of the big gap in our renewable energy system right now. If we don't figure out a way to store renewable energy, there's a chance that we're going to be still dependent on fossil fuels.
So how do we store some of this solar and wind energy for later? Right now you might be thinking, just use a battery. And you're not wrong. Batteries have improved immensely over the past few years, particularly lithium-ion batteries, which use a chemical reaction to store energy. Individual homes that have solar panels often use lithium-ion batteries to store energy, but
there's a few reasons lithium-ion isn't perfect for the grid.
This is Neil Danesha, a founding writer at Heatmap, a climate news site, and he wrote about this for Vox in 2022.
One is just the scale that's needed. We would need a lot at a level that we just don't really have right now.
That's a challenge because lithium is only found in a few places on Earth.
But more importantly, we need lithium-ion batteries for other things. Lithium-ion battery is really good for stuff that moves because it's relatively light.
Meaning it's better suited for things like electric cars and portable electronics, not power grids that stay still. Luckily, there's another energy storage solution that's actually been around for a long time.
This is the site for the first pumped storage hydroelectric station in Southern Ireland.
This is a type of energy storage called pumped storage hydro. They were first built in Europe. The US built one in 1929. And many more were built in the 1970s and 80s as a way to store nuclear power. Today, these facilities are all over the world. There are 39 of them in the US. And they store energy in a really fascinating yet simple way. When energy demand is low, renewable or fossil fuel energy is used to pump water from a reservoir or river up a mountain into a higher reservoir, basically converting this energy into what's called potential energy.
So potential energy, you might kind of remember from high school physics. When a thing is up at a height, it has stored potential energy. When it's let go, it turns into kinetic energy.
When that energy is needed, the water is released down the mountain, where it's converted into kinetic energy that spins a turbine and generates electricity for the grid. It's a way of combining water, a mountain, and gravity into a battery, and it can be about 90% efficient, meaning only 10% of this energy is lost in the process. Pump storage hydro works really well, but it's difficult to build more.
Well, for starters, you need a mountain, and you need to hollow out a mountain to put pumps inside it, and it takes a lot of money, and we don't have mountains everywhere.
So the ideal way to store renewable energy would be something that's cheaper and smaller than a pump storage hydro plant, but works in roughly the same way. One company, Energy Vault, is also using gravity to store renewable energy, but without the water or mountain. Instead, renewable energy is used to lift heavy blocks of concrete up into the air, where it becomes potential energy. Then, when it's needed, the blocks are released, spinning a turbine which converts the potential energy back into electricity. Energy Vault calls this gravity energy storage, and while it's still being tested, the company claims it could be more than 80% efficient. A company called QuidNet is working on a different version of the same principle. Their geomechanical pump storage unit uses renewable energy to pump water underground into a pressurized hole, where it can be stored as potential energy, then released back up to the surface to spin a turbine and generate electricity. Both techniques are betting on potential energy as a solution for storing renewable energy for the grid.
I think this partly because potential energy has shown itself to be pretty efficient. Also, realistically, fewer moving parts. If all you're doing basically is using gravity to work with you, you have a pretty massive force of nature on your side right there.
But potential energy isn't the only possible solution. Other companies are using renewable energy to superheat salt, insulating it, then releasing that heat to create steam or hot air to drive a turbine. Basically storing renewables by converting them to thermal energy. Then there's a company that's betting on rusted iron.
They're called iron-air batteries, and what they do is they utilize the chemical reaction that creates rust to store and discharge energy. This thing that we all sort of think of as an inconvenience could be really useful is just kind of beautiful to me.
Right now, these ideas are all in various stages of development, but they are attracting investors. And the hope is that several will work, because one might not fit every power grid.
The grid, like renewable energy overall, is going to be a sort of patchwork solution. And so the more we try these solutions, the closer we get to figuring out exactly what the right mix is for what we need for the grid of the future.
Industry is the single largest user of energy in the world. Decarbonizing industry becomes a more and more critical portion of getting to zero. Industry is a place where it's really hard to have a green premium, because whether you make cement or baby food, that's a low margin commodity, and energy is a huge portion of the cost of producing those commodities. If we're going to decarbonize industry, we need a replacement for fuel that is not more expensive. We have intermittent wind and solar energy that are now cheaper than burning fuel. It's a hard problem because 3/4 of the energy used by industry is in the form of heat, not electricity. Rondo is building a new class of solution to solve that problem. Our breakthrough was figuring out how to do heat storage from intermittent electricity at very high temperatures and deliver continuous industrial heat. We found a unique way of combining the same wire that's in your toaster with a pretty ordinary brick. It's a higher temperature brick. They call it refractory. It's made from silicon, oxygen, and aluminum, 80% of Earth's crust. So there are no supply chain limits. We heat brick with toaster wire. It doesn't get cheaper than that. About 95% of all the industrial heat in the world is serviceable from the current Rondo technology. We are now running on a go-fast basis of several hundred projects around the world. We are at a renaissance right now of investigating how to store electricity for industrial heat. It is an exciting moment.
Energy storage, both for electricity and heat, represent an important step in full electrification. San Diego's San Vicente Energy Storage Project will offer an important hydroelectric storage solution, which will be supplemented by other technologies.
For an increasing number of people, it's geothermal energy, and that's for good reasons. We sit on a big hot bowl of molten rock, and it seems like the obvious thing to do. But in contrast to nuclear fusion, where every small step gets huge press attention, no one ever talks about what's going on with geothermal energy. No one besides me, of course, because in the past months, a few very interesting things have happened. Let's have a look. The amount of energy that resides in Earth's crust in the form of heat is staggering. Geoscientists estimate that the total energy reserves in the upper 10 kilometers of Earth's crust are enough to cover the world's energy needs for several 100 million years. The major problem with geothermal energy is that drilling is really expensive, and the deeper you want to drill, the more expensive it gets. That's why, at the moment, geothermal energy is commercially viable only in places where the heat isn't too far deep down. Then again, the technology of geothermal energy has never been much developed, because if you're drilling already, you might as well drill for oil or gas and use that to generate energy. Oil and gas has become somewhat unpopular recently, and now the technology of geothermal energy production is receiving a close look. And there's been so little done that easy gains can still be made. The first progress report comes from the American company Quaise Energy. It's a spin-out from MIT. They just added another $21 million in funding for their microwave drilling system and say that they want to begin in the fall to test it at a geothermal site in Marble Falls, Texas. Their aim is to drill really deep to places where it's so hot that water becomes supercritical. At supercritical temperatures, water can transport much more energy, and that makes power plants much more efficient. They want to get to such depth by combining a traditional rotary drill with a millimeter wave laser. They claim that this way they'll be able to drill 20 kilometers deep in just 100 days, and that with their technology they could reach supercritical temperatures at 90% of locations across the globe. If that was right, it'd basically solve our energy problems. I strongly doubt that this is going to work, seeing that so far supercritical wells all either collapsed or blew up. Then again, it's not any crazier than what fusion startups promise, and certainly way deeper. The United States has a lot of potential for geothermal energy, especially in the West, so it's maybe not so surprising that our second news also comes from the USA. Earlier this year, the American Department of Energy, DOE for short, selected 2 pilot projects to test what is called an enhanced geothermal system. Usually, geothermal energy systems rely on naturally occurring hot water reservoirs. The issue is that these don't occur all that frequently. The idea of enhanced systems is to drill into hot rocks, push in water, let it warm up, and extract it elsewhere. This could vastly increase the number of potential sites for geothermal energy, which is what makes this idea so promising. One of the projects that the DOE is financing is led by Fervo Energy and will be situated in Utah, where they already have a test site for enhanced geothermal. The test site exceeded expectations in drilling rates and cost less money than projected, which is really quite quite something. The new project now wants to build on the knowledge that they gathered. The second project the DOE is financing comes from a fossil fuel company, namely Chevron. They have announced that they want to build a small test plant in Northern California. On the opposite end of things is a plant so modest it makes you wonder why it hasn't been done a century ago. It comes from the Canadian startup Eva. Their innovation is that the water in their geothermal plants goes around in a closed loop. The company claims that their system is so efficient that it can generate gigawatts anywhere in the world. They previously had a test site in Alberta in Canada and are now beginning construction of their first commercial scale plant near Munich in Germany. You might think that closed loop systems are not exactly groundbreaking new tech, and that's right, but conventional geothermal power plants are open-loop systems. They use naturally occurring reservoirs of hot water or steam. So you see, there are easy gains to be made because this technology has been so underexplored. In my mind, geothermal is the dark horse of the race to clean energy. Yes, at the moment solar and wind are leading, but geothermal might catch up and leave everyone in the dust. And who knows, maybe we even get a few extra volcanoes.
That concludes our review of renewable energy technologies that we can expect to see in the future. We hope this will be of benefit to you as we try to persuade San Diego area residents of the promise of the renewable energy revolution. Thank you for watching.